Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. This is actually AI.MAG podcast edition number 10, which is great. And today, we're diving into something that's just moving incredibly fast, isn't it? Artificial intelligence and, well, how we're trying to govern it.
It really is.
It took, 75 years for landline phones to hit 100 million users?
Yeah, something like that.
Mobile phones, maybe 16 years. The internet, about 7.
Right.
But ChatGPT, it hit that same 100 million mark in just 2 months.
Incredible.
That kind of speed, that acceleration, it just really highlights the urgency of what we're discussing today, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. I mean, that pace, it's not just some interesting number. It's a massive signal about how deeply and how quickly AI is getting woven into, well, everything. Society, the economy. It's a real wake-up call that we need, robust governance.
Right now.
Exactly, like right now. Before the tech completely outpaces our ability to sort of steer it.
Precisely. So for this deep dive, we thought we'd zero in on a really key piece of legislation, the UK Data Access and Use Act 2025.
Mm-hmm.
This act feels like a pretty significant move by the UK to navigate, well, both the massive opportunities and, let's face it, the complex challenges that come with AI and this absolute explosion of data.
Yeah, you can't separate AI from the data it feeds on.
Exactly. So our mission today, yours and mine, is really to distill the most important bits, the key knowledge and insights from a whole range of sources. We've got the Act itself, obviously, but also global reports, insights from AI.MAG, expert commentary.
A real mix.
A real mix, yeah. To help you, our listener, quickly get a handle on what this Act is really about, what its implications might be, and how it fits into that bigger global picture of AI governance.
And that global picture is just so important for context, isn't it? Because no country is doing this in a vacuum.
Not at all.
So yeah, our exploration today, it pulls from legal texts, like you said, but also analyses from places like the World Bank, specific industry takes, even looking at AI specifically in finance, which is a huge area. This kind of multi-angled approach should hopefully give you a pretty comprehensive view covering the legal stuff, the economic side, the ethics, which are massive, and the practical realities of it all.
Absolutely. Think of it as mapping out the territory. First, we'll unpack the UK Act itself, try to understand its specific architecture, what makes it tick.
Dig down under the hood.
Exactly. Then we'll zoom out, put in that global context, compare it with how other nations are tackling this, because the approaches are often really different.
Sometimes dramatically different.
Right. And finally, we'll dive into those bigger, overarching ethical and practical challenges, the kind of stuff that, frankly, everyone, governments, companies, society, has to grapple with when trying to govern AI. So yeah, let's get into it.
Okay,
let's kick off then with the UK's new approach, this Data Access and Use Act 2025. At its heart, what's the fundamental goal here? What's driving this legislation?
Well, at its core, the Act is really designed to streamline things, to modernize how data is accessed and used right across the UK economy.
Yeah.
And it's very much a direct response to the fact that AI systems are just incredibly data hungry. They need huge amounts of data to work well, to learn, to improve. So this Act is basically trying to create a more efficient environment for that data to flow, but in this key, doing it in a way that's still regulated, that still has safeguards.
Right. It's not just opening the floodgates.
Right.
So given how wide-ranging this act seems, you mentioned it covers a lot, how does it differ from, say, older data laws like GDPR? What makes it feel specifically tailored for this AI age?
That's a great question, because it's definitely not just, tweaking existing rules or adding a little AI appendix.
Right.
Its reach is remarkably comprehensive, and that reflects just how pervasive AI is becoming. It goes beyond the sort of general data protection principles we're familiar with. It specifically gets into privacy and electronic communications. So thinking about your everyday online interactions, it sets up regulation for digital verification services, how you prove who you are online.
Okay.
And here's where it really shows its AI focus. It tackles head-on the use of copyrighted works in AI training, which, as you know, is a massive, ongoing battleground.
Huge issue.
Huge. And it also directly addresses the creation of, intimate images using AI, tackling deepfakes, essentially.
Wow. Okay, so it's really trying to cover the waterfront there, from the technical plumbing to these really quite sensitive ethical issues.
Exactly. It shows a very holistic approach. It's like they realized AI forces you to think about copyright, data privacy, digital identity, and even things like deepfake abuse all at the same time under one umbrella.
That scope from, copyright law right through to deepfakes. It is fascinating. It does sound like maybe the UK is trying to set a kind of global example here, striking a balance between encouraging innovation but also putting in some pretty strong safeguards.
I think that's definitely the ambition, yeah. It's a clear attempt to build a structured environment where data can flow more easily to fuel AI innovation, but with critical safeguards baked in from the start. It certainly positions the UK in well, quite a distinct place in that global conversation about how you actually govern this stuff effectively.
So we've got the broad scope, but let's get into the mechanics. How does the Act actually unlock the value in all that customer and business data? What are the specific tools or mechanisms it uses to enable more data access?
Okay, so this is where it gets quite practical. The Act gives quite significant power to the Secretary of State to bring in regulations.
Right.
And these regulations can actually require businesses' data holders to give third parties access to both customer data and business data, with consent where needed, of course.
Mandated access. That sounds strong.
It is. And what's particularly interesting and points towards, building a more standardized system is that these regulations can explicitly tell those third parties they must use specified facilities or services.
Like what kind of services?
Things like dashboard services, other electronic communication services, or application programming interfaces, APIs.
Okay, so standardized pipes for the data to flow through.
Precisely. It's not just saying you can share data. It's suggesting a move towards, standardized, interconnected data ecosystems, like building the actual data highways, rather than just letting people drive across fields haphazardly.
That makes sense if you want efficiency and scale.
Yeah.
But building highways needs rules of the road. What about the standards and compliance side once this data starts flowing more freely? How do they ensure quality, security, interoperability?
Yeah, absolutely crucial. The Act is very clear on this. It emphasizes that these mandated third parties must comply with specified standards or participate in specified arrangements when they use these facilities and services. This is all about setting a baseline, ensuring a minimum level of quality, security, and, importantly, interoperability across the whole system.
Right, so things can actually talk to each other securely.
Exactly. It's trying to prevent a kind of data Wild West where security is patchy and trust evaporates. The aim is for data to flow more freely, yes, but securely and consistently.
Okay, so you've got mandated access, specified standards. But how is this whole system actually governed day to day? What mechanisms are there for oversight, handling complaints, resolving disputes when things inevitably go wrong?
Good point. The Act builds in quite a bit of structure for that. It includes provisions that require data holders or those third-party recipients to implement procedures for the handling of complaints.
Right.
And it sets up formal dispute resolution processes, too. This could even involve appointing a specific determiner with powers to make rulings on disputes, so there's a clear pathway if someone has a grievance.
Okay, like an ombudsman or something?
Potentially something like that, yeah. And crucially, the Secretary of State gets monitoring powers to check if everyone's complying with their authorization conditions. This includes the power to require the provision of documents or information, although there are some restrictions on that to prevent, fishing expeditions.
And who pays for all this regulation and oversight?
The funding question. The Act allows for a levy to be imposed on those data holders or third parties who appear to the Secretary of State or the Treasury to be capable of being directly affected by these regulations. So the industry players involved help fund the regulatory infrastructure.
Okay.
And interestingly, on the flip side, the Act also enables financial assistance, think grants, loans, guarantees for certain data-related projects or initiatives.
So they're taxing some parts, but also potentially funding others.
Exactly. It shows a really proactive stance. They're not just regulating, they're actively trying to shape and support the growth of this data economy, maybe kickstarting certain innovative uses of data.
That financial assistance part is interesting. It suggests they really want to steer the development, not just react. And you mentioned finance earlier. It sounds like the financial services sector gets some very specific attention in the Act. It's a massive data playground, after all.
It absolutely does. Finance is clearly a key focus area. The Financial Conduct Authority, the FCA, gets specific powers to establish what are called FCA interface rules.
Interface rules, what does that cover?
These rules can impose specific interface-related requirements on a really broad range of players in the financial sector. That includes the bodies that might run these data interfaces, the firms required to set them up, or basically anyone using an interface or needing to comply with its standards.
Okay.
The goal here is really to standardize and regulate how financial data is accessed and shared. Think about things like open banking, but maybe extending that further. It could enhance consumer protection, boost market efficiency, and potentially open up new avenues for fintech innovation.
And does it get into the nitty-gritty, like fees?
Yes, it does. The rules can specify how fees for using these data services are determined and how they're used, and even how unpaid amounts or interest are recovered. So it provides a pretty comprehensive regulatory grip on the mechanics of data access in this very sensitive, very data-rich sector. It acknowledges the unique risks, but also the opportunities when you bring AI and finance data together.
Right, that makes sense. Okay, so we've looked at how the Act handles the flow of business and customer data. Let's switch gears slightly to another critical area: digital identity.
Yeah.
How we prove who we are online. The Act seems to put quite a lot of focus on digital verification services, DVS.
Yep.
What are these exactly, and how does the Act regulate them?
Yeah, DVS is a key piece of the digital infrastructure puzzle. Essentially, digital verification services are the tools and processes we use to confirm our identity online. Think logging into your bank, verifying your age to buy something, accessing government services online.
Okay, standard stuff now, really.
Increasingly so. And the Act sets up a clear regulatory framework for them, focusing particularly on a registration process for companies that provide these DVS services.
Right, so you know who's approved to handle this sensitive verification.
Exactly. It's a foundational step to build trust and security around online identities, which are just becoming absolutely critical in, almost every aspect of life and the economy.
I can imagine national security must be a massive consideration here if you're talking about who gets to verify identities.
Yeah.
Does the Act address that potential risk?
It does, very directly, and this is a significant power granted by the Act. The Secretary of State gets the explicit authority to refuse to register a person in the DVS register purely on the grounds of national security.
Wow. Without giving a reason.
Well, this is where it gets tricky. The Act acknowledges that providing the reason for refusal might itself be contrary to national security interests. So it highlights this really delicate balancing act between the usual need for transparency in government decisions and the absolute imperative to protect national interests. It's a powerful clause, and you can see how it might be controversial.
Definitely. So if a provider does get registered, how do they show they're trustworthy? Is there like a seal of approval, a certification process?
Yeah.
And what about when public bodies need to share information for verification? How's that handled?
Yes, there's a mechanism for building trust. A DVS provider can apply to get their services certified by an accredited conformity assessment body. Think of it like an independent auditor checking their systems and processes.
Okay.
And that certification can then be officially noted in the DVS register, giving users and businesses more confidence. On the information disclosure point, when public authorities share data for verification, the Act generally says this: do not breach any obligation of confidence. But, and it's a crucial but, the disclosure must not contravene the data protection legislation. Data protection rules still trump confidentiality agreements in this context. And to underline how seriously they take this, the Act actually creates a specific criminal offense for unlawful disclosure of information obtained under these provisions, complete with penalties.
Okay, so there are teeth to enforce the proper handling of identity data.
Definitely. They're sending a clear signal about protecting sensitive identity information.
Is there also a broader framework, like a code of practice, to guide how DVS operates and evolves? And is there ongoing oversight?
Yes, there is, and it involves quite strong parliamentary oversight, which is interesting. The Act mandates a specific code of practice for DVS. And importantly, the first version of this code and any significant changes to it later must be laid before and approved by a resolution of each House of Parliament.
So Parliament gets the final say.
Exactly. That level of scrutiny really underscores the importance placed on getting digital identity right ethically and securely. Plus, the Act requires annual reports on how these DVS provisions are working in practice. So there's built-in accountability and a mechanism for review and adaptation over time, which is vital given how fast tech changes.
Okay, now let's shift focus to a really major structural change the Act introduces. It sounds like the UK's main data watchdog, the Information Commissioner's Office, is undergoing a pretty fundamental transformation. This isn't just a minor tweak, is it?
No, not at all. This is one of the most significant structural reforms in the entire Act. It really signals a shift in the UK's whole approach to data protection oversight.
How so? What's actually happening?
It involves the abolition of the Office of Information Commissioner, So the single-person role at the top is gone.
Right.
And its functions are directly transferred to a new body called the Information Commission.
Okay, a commission instead of a commissioner.
Exactly. It's more than just a name change. It's a move from a single individual figurehead to a multi-member body, like a board.
Why the change? What's the thinking behind moving to a commission model?
Well, it arguably reflects the sheer complexity and growing importance of data governance. The thinking might be that the job has become too big, too complex for one person to oversee effectively. A commission model brings, potentially a broader range of expertise, more robust decision-making through collective deliberation, maybe more resilience.
So who actually sits on this new information commission? And how are they appointed to make sure it has the right expertise and, crucially, independence?
The structure laid out involves both non-executive members and executive members. The non-execs include a chair, who is appointed by the king, but on the recommendation of the Secretary of State.
Okay.
And then there are the executive members, including a chief executive, who is appointed by the non-executive members themselves.
So a bit of internal and external appointment.
Right. And the Act specifies formal consultation processes for these key appointments, involving the Secretary of State and the Commission's chair. The aim is clearly to balance political accountability with ensuring the Commission has the necessary expertise and operational independence.
And what about its powers and responsibilities? Does this new commission have a wider remit or new duties compared to the old ICO, so especially thinking about AI?
Yes, it does seem to have an expanded role in certain areas. It still has the core functions, of course, like handling complaints and enforcing data protection law, but it also gets new duties, like providing formal opinions on codes of conduct submitted to it.
Guiding best practice, then.
Exactly. And significantly, it gains the power to accredit a body for the purpose of monitoring whether persons comply with a code of conduct.
So it can essentially deputize monitoring functions.
In a way, yes. But that accreditation process is strict. The monitoring body has to show it has clear procedures for handling infringements and, importantly, that it has no conflicts of interest. And if one of these accredited bodies suspends or kicks someone out of a code, they must inform the Commission and explain why. So the Commission retains ultimate oversight. This suggests a move towards more structured self-regulation within certain sectors, but under the Commission's watchful eye.
That's a pretty interesting model. Centralizing the authority, but potentially distributing some of the day-to-day monitoring. What do you see as the bigger implications of this whole restructuring? Does it promise, say, more coherent, consistent oversight? Or could it risk becoming slower, more bureaucratic because it's a commission now?
That really is the key question, isn't it?
Yeah.
The potential upside is definitely greater coherence. A commission might provide a more stable, unified strategic direction for data protection, making enforcement more consistent and the regulatory landscape clearer for everyone. That could be really valuable, especially as AI keeps blurring traditional boundaries.
But the downside?
The potential downside is agility. A multi-member body inherently needs consensus, which can lead to slower decision-making compared to a single commissioner. In a field like AI, where things change incredibly fast, that lack of speed could be a real handicap. Its success will really hinge on how it operates in practice, the quality of the commissioners, the efficiency of their processes, and their ability to stay nimble and responsive.
Okay, let's pivot now to privacy in our electronic communications. Things like emails, messages, website interactions. The Act amends the PEC regulations, the Privacy and Electronic Communications regulations. What are the key changes there, particularly around data breaches?
Right. The PIC regs get some important updates. On data breaches, the amendment to Regulation 5A tightens the notification timeline. It now requires organizations to notify the relevant authority, likely the new Information Commission, of a personal data breach without undue delay and, where feasible, not later than 72 hours after having become aware of it.
72 hours. That sounds familiar.
It does, doesn't it? It brings the UK's rules for telecom providers and similar services much closer into line with the general 72-hour notification requirement under GDPR for other types of data controllers.
And what if they can't meet that deadline?
If the notification is delayed beyond 72 hours, it must be accompanied by reasons for the delay. So there needs to be a justification. It's all about faster reporting, so that risks can be assessed and harm mitigated more quickly, both for individuals and the system overall.
Makes sense. Now, the big one for most people online, cookies, and similar technologies that store information on our phones or computers. Regulation 6 seems to be getting a significant makeover. What's changing there? This affects pretty much every website visit.
It absolutely does. Regulation 6 is arguably the part of PEC that people encounter most directly through cookie banners. The act gives it a substantial overhaul.
Okay. Does it get rid of cookie banners?
Not quite. The general rule still stands. You generally need user consent to store or access information on their device if it's not strictly necessary. So the basic principle of consent for tracking cookies, advertising cookies, etc. remains.
Okay, so banners are probably staying.
Yeah.
But what is changing?
What changes the clarification and expansion of the exceptions, the situations where consent is not required.
Right.
The existing exceptions are maintained, like when storage or access is solely for the purpose of carrying out the transmission of a communication, basically essential for the network to work, or when it's strictly necessary to provide a service the user explicitly requested, like remembering items in a shopping cart.
So the functional stuff, what new exceptions are added?
The Act clarifies and potentially broadens the strictly necessary idea. It adds specific exemptions for things like storing information for automatically authenticating the identity of the subscriber or user, so keeping you logged in.
Okay, that makes sense.
Or maintaining a record of selections made on a website again, like shopping carts or user preferences. And importantly, there's a new explicit exception for collecting information purely for statistical purposes.
Right, analytics. That sounds like it could be quite a broad exception. How is that controlled? Does the user still have any say if it's just for statistics?
That's the crucial part. Yes, they do. For this statistical purposes exception to apply, the user must be given a simple means of objecting, free of charge. And critically, they must not have objected.
So an easy opt-out has to be provided.
Exactly. The focus is on providing practical user control. If you don't want your anonymous visit counted in the site's stats, you have to be given a simple, free way to say no. It's trying to balance the legitimate need for websites to understand usage patterns with the user's right to control their data, even anonymized data.
Simple means of objecting. That sounds good in theory, but implementation will be key, won't it?
Absolutely. The effectiveness hinges on how clear and easy that opt-out mechanism actually is for the average user.
And how do these changes to PEC actually become law? Is it automatic once the act passes, or is there another step?
There's another step. These specific changes usually require secondary legislation, detailed regulations made under the authority of the Act. The Act states that these regulations can make different provision for different purposes, allowing for flexibility, but importantly, they require formal consultation with the Information Commission and other relevant people.
Okay.
And crucially, these regulations generally need parliamentary approval, often through a process called the affirmative procedure before they can actually be enacted. So there's another layer of scrutiny before these new cookie rules fully come into force.
Okay, good to know. Now let's move to two areas where the Act seems really forward-looking, tackling ethical frontiers opened up by modern AI. First, the massive issue of AI and copyrighted works.
Yes, this is absolutely central to the current debates around generative AI. The Act directly addresses this by mandating the Secretary of State to prepare and publish a report on the use of copyright works in the development of AI systems.
A report? What will it look at?
It has to be published within 9 months of the Act passing, so it's quite time-bound. And it needs to consider several key things. How copyrighted works are actually accessed for AI training, thinking about things like web crawlers scraping data. It also needs to look at how effective current enforcement mechanisms are by regulators.
So understanding the problem and whether existing tools work.
Precisely. It's a fact-finding and assessment exercise mandated by law, signaling that the government recognizes this is a major issue needing proper analysis before potentially legislating further.
And given that AI models are often trained on global data sets and developed internationally, does the report just look at the UK?
No, and this is crucial. The report must include consideration of and proposals relating to AI systems developed outside the United Kingdom. It explicitly acknowledges the global nature of AI. You can't regulate AI training data effectively just by looking within your own borders. The report also has to assess the likely effect of proposals on copyright owners and persons who develop or use AI systems. So it has to grapple with that inherent tension between creators wanting compensation and control and AI developers wanting access to data for innovation.
That sounds like a really tricky balancing act to even report on, let alone legislate for.
Immensely tricky. It's one of the thorniest issues in AI policy right now.
And then there's the other side of AI's creative capabilities, the darker side, the creation of fake, intimate images, deep fake pornography, a deeply disturbing issue. How does the act address this directly?
It addresses it very directly and very forcefully. This is a clear response to growing public concern and the real harm caused by this kind of AI misuse. The act introduces a completely new offense.
A specific criminal offense.
Yes, it makes it a crime for someone to be creating or requesting the creation of purported intimate image of adult without that adult's consent, and where the person creating it does not reasonably believe that B consents.
So it targets both the creator and potentially someone commissioning it.
That seems to be the implication, yes. It's a significant legal step. It's not just relying on existing harassment or privacy laws. It's creating a dedicated criminal offense specifically for this type of AI-generated abuse. It sends a very strong message about tackling deepfake pornography and similar malicious uses of generative AI.
That feels like a necessary, if sobering, piece of legislation for the modern age. Okay, so we've really dug into the UK's Data Access and Use Act. Now let's pull the lens back as we planned and put this into the wider global context. The EU AI Act is often talked about as the big one, the pioneer. How would you characterize its overall aim and its place in the world?
Yeah, the EU AI Act really is a landmark piece of legislation. It's widely seen as the world's first comprehensive AI law.
First mover.
Definitely. Europe positioned itself as the first continent to regulate AI in such a horizontal, cross-sector way. Its fundamental goal is pretty clear: ensuring AI is developed and deployed in a way that's ethical, transparent, and safe, with a very strong emphasis on protecting fundamental rights, democracy, the rule of law, and environmental sustainability, protecting citizens and society from AI's potential harms.
And it's best known for its risk-based approach, isn't it? Can you break that down for us? How does it categorize AI systems?
Absolutely. That risk-based approach is its defining feature. It sorts AI systems into different tiers based on the potential risk they pose. First, and most importantly, you have high-risk systems.
Like what falls into that category?
These are systems used in really critical areas. Think critical infrastructure, education and vocational training, employment and worker management, access to essential services like credit or benefits, law enforcement, migration and border control, administration of justice, also medical devices, automotive safety components.
So areas where failure or bias could have really serious consequences.
Exactly. And because of that, these high-risk systems face very strict requirements before they can even be put on the market or put into service.
What kind of requirement?
They're pretty extensive. Things like having robust risk and quality management systems, detailed data governance practices, comprehensive technical documentation so regulators can understand how they work, thorough record keeping or logging, providing clear instructions for downstream deployers on how to use the system safely, and designing them with principles like accuracy, robustness, and cybersecurity built in from the start. It's a heavy compliance burden, but deemed necessary given the risks.
That sounds incredibly thorough for the high-risk category. What about systems that are deemed less risky? Does the EU try to avoid over-regulating everything?
Yes, it tries to be proportionate. Below high risk, you have limited risk systems.
Like what?
This category includes things like chatbots or AI systems that generate or manipulate image, audio, or video content. Think deepfakes. These systems aren't banned or heavily restricted like high-risk ones, but they are subject to specific light transparency obligations. The main goal here is just to make sure people know when they're interacting with an AI or when content is artificially generated or manipulated, so users aren't deceived.
So disclosure is key there.
Exactly. And then finally, you have the minimal risk category. This covers the vast majority of AI systems currently in use, things like AI-enabled video games, spam filters, inventory management systems.
Right.
These are seen as posing little or no risk to rights or safety, and so they are largely unregulated by the AI Act. Businesses can continue to develop and use these freely, though other laws might still apply, of course.
Okay, that tiered system seems logical. But what about the really powerful underlying AI models themselves, like the big foundational models or general-purpose AI, GPAI, that can be adapted for many uses? Does the Act address those specifically?
Yes, it does. This was a major point of discussion as the Act was developed, recognizing the power of these foundational models. The Act includes specific obligations for developers of all general-purpose AI models.
Regardless of risk.
Yes, a baseline for all GPAI. They have to provide technical documentation, clear instructions for use. For downstream providers integrating them into their own systems, they need to comply with the EU copyright directive. That's a nod to the training data issue again. And they have to publish a detailed summary about the content used for training. Transparency is key here.
Okay, baseline transparency. What if a GPAI model is deemed particularly powerful or risky.
Right. For GPA models that are identified as posing systemic risks, the really large, highly capable models with broad impact, there are additional, more stringent requirements.
That-
These include conducting thorough evaluations of models for risks, performing state-of-the-art adversarial testing, that's the red teaming we talked about, trying to break the model to find flaws, tracking and reporting serious incidents to the authorities, and ensuring a high level of cybersecurity protections. It's acknowledging that with great power comes great regulatory scrutiny.
It certainly sounds comprehensive, maybe even complex. But like any major law, it must have its critics or identified weaknesses, right? What are some of the limitations people point out?
Yes, definitely. No legislation is perfect, especially in such a fast-moving field. One key criticism is that the list-based approach for identifying high-risk sectors might not be future-proof.
How so?
Well, the Act lists specific use cases within sectors that are considered high risk. But what happens when a completely novel AI application emerges that poses significant risks but doesn't neatly fit into those predefined categories? The list might struggle to guard against novel AI systems and could become outdated, leaving regulatory gaps.
So it might lack flexibility.
Potentially, yeah. Although there are mechanisms for updating the list, that process takes time. Another significant critique highlighted in some sources is that persons affected by AI systems have no specifically enforceable rights or role within the AI Act itself.
Meaning individuals can't directly use the AI Act to challenge a decision.
Largely, yes. While the Act aims to protect individuals, their ability to seek redress for harm caused by an AI system would likely rely more on other existing EU laws, like the GDPR, which grants rights related to automated decision-making, or national liability rules. The AI Act itself doesn't create many direct individual rights of action.
Okay, that's an important nuance. And finally, implementing and enforcing something this ambitious across 27 different countries sounds like a massive challenge. How is the EU planning to manage that?
It is a huge undertaking. The Act establishes a new central body, the EU AI Office, housed within the European Commission. Its main job is to ensure the consistent application of the AI Act across all member states. It will oversee the rules for GPA models, coordinate actions by national authorities, and play a key role in developing standards and guidelines. There's also an AI board composed of representatives from the member states, which will advise the Commission and help ensure consistency.
So a central office and a coordinating board.
Exactly. The AI office is meant to be the engine room, monitoring, supervising, enforcing where necessary, promoting voluntary codes of practice to clarify rules, and also leading the EU's efforts in international cooperation on AI. It's designed to be the central hub for making this whole complex system work across the Union.
Okay, from the EU's very structured regulatory approach, let's swing over to Dubai. Their strategy seems almost the opposite in some ways, less about putting down rules first and more about full-speed acceleration using AI as a core economic engine. What kind of targets are they setting?
Dubai's approach is definitely marked by its sheer ambition and its focus on economic impact. They're looking at AI as a primary driver of future prosperity. Internal government estimates suggest AI could contribute over 58 billion euros to Dubai's economy by the year 2030.
Wow, 58 billion euros.
Yeah, it's a huge number. And they have a target for AI to contribute up to 14% to the country's GDP by the end of this decade. That really signals a deep national commitment. AI isn't just another tech sector for them. It's central to their vision for economic transformation and maintaining global competitiveness.
Those are massive targets. How are they actually planning to get there? What are the key strategic initiatives they're putting in place? It must go beyond just passing laws.
Oh, absolutely. It's very action-oriented. They've launched key government-led programs like the Dubai Universal Blueprint for Artificial Intelligence that came out in April 2024. And there's the overarching Dubai Data Initiative.
Okay.
But perhaps the most groundbreaking piece is the Dubai Pulse platform. It's described as the first integrated data platform of the region.
Integrated data platform. What does that mean in practice?
It means they've created a central hub that provides access to over 1,200 data sets from both the public and private sector. Imagine a massive, curated data lake or reservoir that government entities, researchers, and potentially businesses can tap into for developing and training AI applications. It's about making the crucial raw material data readily available on a large scale.
That sounds like a huge enabler for AI development. Are they actually putting this data in these plans to use? Can we see real-world examples of AI being deployed across Dubai?
Yes, very much so. It's not just talk. They've already identified more than 100 use cases across over 50 government entities.
Wow.
And these aren't just pilots. There are real-time deployments in sectors such as healthcare, legal services, transport, and energy. A recent report, the Dubai State of AI report, found a really high adoption rate. 96% of participating government entities said they'd adopted at least one AI solution.
96%. That's incredible penetration.
It is. And importantly, it's impacting citizens directly. The report noted that 48% of reported use cases directly impact citizen-facing services. Things like improving customer care, personalizing services, making interactions with the government smoother. So it's quite deeply integrated into the fabric of public service delivery already.
That's impressive speed and scale. With such rapid deployment, how are they handling the ethical considerations? And what about the people needed to build and manage all this AI, the talent pipeline?
They seem quite intentional about ethics, embedding it directly into their processes. The report mentions AI ethics being built into procurement, deployment, and performance evaluation across public services. So it's not just an afterthought, it's part of the operational checklist.
Okay, practical ethics.
Right. And on the human capital side, they've made a significant investment. Over 700 government employees have been trained in specific AI-focused competencies through various upskilling programs. They're building the internal capacity to manage and oversee this AI transformation responsibly.
Are they doing this all internally, or are they collaborating on the international stage as well?
They're definitely looking outwards, too. Dubai is involved in collaborations with the United Nations, for example, through the Global Initiative for Virtual Worlds and AI. They also created something called the UN Citiverse Challenge, aiming to spark innovative ideas using virtual worlds and digital public infrastructure. It shows they want to be seen as a global leader and partner in this space, attracting talent and investment.
So, if you were to contrast Dubai's whole philosophy with, say, the EU's approach we just discussed, what's the fundamental difference?
The contrast is quite stark, isn't it? Dubai's model is very much centralized, top-down, and extremely outcome-focused, primarily on economic growth and efficiency gains. It's about aggressive implementation and transformation, using AI as a tool to achieve national strategic goals. The EU's approach, while also wanting innovation, is arguably more focused on setting regulatory guardrails first, emphasizing fundamental rights, safety, and creating a level playing field through comprehensive rules. Dubai seems to be prioritizing the move fast part while building ethics into the process, whereas the EU prioritizes get the rules right first. It's a race towards AI dominance, but run on very different tracks.
Fascinating contrast. Okay, beyond the big players like the UK, EU, and the ambitious model of Dubai, the global landscape is full of diverse approaches. Let's touch on India. They have a dedicated AI mission. What are its key features? What does it tell us about India's strategy?
India's AI mission is indeed quite comprehensive, and it clearly recognizes that raw computing power is fundamental. It comes with a substantial budget around Rs 10,371.92 crore, which is roughly USD 1.38 billion. That's serious investment.
What are they spending it on?
Several key pillars. First, building a high-end scalable AI computing ecosystem. This involves setting up infrastructure with over 10,000 graphics processing units, GPUs, through public-private partnerships. So a massive boost in national compute capacity.
Right, the basic engine needed for AI.
Exactly. Second, creating an AI marketplace to offer AI as a service and pre-trained models. This aims to make AI tools more accessible, particularly for smaller businesses or researchers who can't build everything from scratch.
Democratizing access.
Precisely. Third, establishing the India AI Innovation Center. This has a specific focus on developing indigenous large multimodal models, LMMs, and domain-specific foundational models. The goal here is self-reliance and creating AI that understands India's diverse languages, cultures, and specific needs.
Building their own models.
Yes. And fourth, launching an India AI datasets platform. This is designed to streamline access to quality, non-personal datasets for training AI. Again, recognizing data as a critical national resource. So overall, it's a very strategic, multi-pronged approach focused on building foundational infrastructure, fostering domestic innovation, and ensuring broad access.
That's a really solid plan focusing on the fundamentals. Now, Korea has this intriguing data dam project. Can you unpack that concept for us? It sounds quite unique.
It really is a unique and evocative name. The Data Dam project in Korea is about collecting and integrating vast amounts of data from many different sectors: healthcare, transport, finance, you name it.
Okay.
The idea is to bring data from various public and private sources together onto a centralized platform, clean it, standardize it, and make it readily usable. The analogy is quite literal. Just like a physical dam gathers water and makes it available for various uses like irrigation or power generation, the data dam aims to collect data and make it flow efficiently to fuel AI development across the entire economy.
So national-level data orchestration.
Exactly. Creating a robust data ecosystem by managing data as a strategic national asset, breaking down silos between sectors, and providing high-quality data fuel for widespread AI innovation.
And what about Germany? They have a long history in engineering and research.
Yeah.
How are they positioned in the AI race compared to these other nations putting billions into compute or building data dams?
Germany's history with AI is surprisingly long, as you say. Government funding actually started way back in 1973, which is almost 2 decades before the famous Dartmouth conference that really launched the term artificial intelligence.
Wow, really early.
Yeah. They established the Deutsches Forschungszentrum für Künstliche Intelligenz, or DFKI, back in 1988. Initially, the focus was more on knowledge-based systems, the earlier wave of AI.
Right.
More recently, they've significantly reinvested. They've created 6 additional new AI competence research centers and funded 150 new professorships in AI, backed by about 120 million euros annually.
So strong focus on research and talent.
Definitely. Germany ranked 9th in the world for AI firm foundings in 2023, which is solid. However, there's also a self-assessment, particularly when compared to places like Dubai, that they have some catch-up demand in terms of broader digitalization and perhaps translating research into widespread commercial application as quickly. Their strength remains heavily in R&D, often linked to their powerful industrial base, think industrial AI manufacturing applications.
It seems like many countries are trying to find ways to test the waters with AI regulation without jumping into heavy-handed rules too soon, especially given how fast everything's changing. Are regulatory sandboxes becoming a popular tool for this?
Yes, very much so. Regulatory sandboxes are emerging as a really important governance mechanism, as highlighted in the World Bank report we looked at.
How do they work?
Countries like Brazil and Singapore are using them quite effectively. They set up these pilot programs, or say 5-year regulatory sandboxes for specific AI applications. The idea is to create a controlled environment where companies can test innovative technologies like autonomous vehicles in Singapore's case under relaxed or modified regulations, but with close supervision from the regulator.
So, testing in the real world, but with safety nets.
Exactly. It facilitates safe development and integration of new AI tech. It allows for regulatory experimentation. Governments can learn about the real-world impacts and challenges, gather data, and figure out what kind of permanent rules are actually needed, rather than guessing or imposing rules that might stifle innovation unnecessarily. It's about learning by doing in a controlled way.
That sounds like a sensible approach for such a dynamic field. Now, underlying all these national strategies are some powerful geopolitical currents. The U.S.-China tech rivalry in particular seems to be casting a long shadow over AI development globally.
Oh, absolutely. The geopolitical tensions between the U.S. and China are fundamentally reshaping the entire global tech landscape, and AI is right at the heart of it. It's almost creating 2 parallel tech universes.
How so?
Well, things like U.S. trade embargoes and tariffs on advanced technology going to China have had, perhaps, an unintended consequence. They've heavily encouraged China to invest a lot of money and resources into building its own domestic capabilities, especially in semiconductors and AI.
Accelerating their push for self-sufficiency.
Precisely. It's led to a strategic pivot where China is now actively developing its own standards for technology, moving away from its previous model of largely delivering products based on Western standard requirements. This drive for independence and self-reliance is now a cornerstone of China's national AI strategy. It's about technological sovereignty.
And how does China's huge investment in data infrastructure fit into this picture? We hear about their vast monitoring systems.
That's a critical piece of their strategy. China is engaged in massive data collection efforts. They have this concept of a virtual monitoring system coupled with the real one on the streets, all evaluated using AI. This creates, as one source puts it, a gigantic data generation machine.
And the purpose of all that data.
The explicit goal is twofold. First, to accelerate the independent development of their own Chinese AI systems.
Hmm.
More data means better, faster training for their models. Second, and this is geopolitically significant, they aim to make this data available to their alliance partners, particularly in the global south.
How does that connect to wider initiatives?
It ties directly into their Belt and Road initiative. That project isn't just about building physical infrastructure like ports and railways. It's also about digital infrastructure, establishing access to the network. This fosters knowledge exchange and technological transfer, positioning China as a provider of AI capabilities and data resources, potentially creating a sphere of technological influence aligned with its standards.
That certainly raises significant cybersecurity and strategic concerns in the West. Are we seeing concrete reactions to this, particularly from the U.S. side, reflecting this tension?
Yes, definitely. There are growing concerns about data security and reliance on potentially vulnerable infrastructure. For example, the sources mention massive security incidents recently at Microsoft, specifically with their Azure cloud platform.
Right.
This has reportedly led some U.S. federal agencies to begin withdrawing their data from those commercial clouds, indicating a move towards maybe more controlled, perhaps government-run, or highly secured private environments, a sign of decreasing trust.
And what about personnel moves? Any signals there?
There are some interesting observations noted. For instance, the appointment of Paul Nakasone, the former head of the U.S. National Security Agency and U.S. Cyber Command, to OpenAI's board of directors was viewed with Argus-eyed attention by some observers.
Linking top security figures with leading AI labs.
Exactly. That, combined with OpenAI's known collaborations with places like the Los Alamos National Laboratory, which works on critical U.S. national security projects, really highlights this increasingly blurry line between cutting-edge commercial AI development and national security interests. It raises all sorts of complex questions about data control, influence, potential conflicts of interest, and even future antitrust concerns as these powerful AI companies become more deeply embedded with state security apparatuses.
So if we're talking about a tech war, as some frame it, what's the perspective from the investment world? Do they see winners and losers in this kind of geopolitical tech battle?
Well, the perspective from the investment firm Silver Bear, cited in the sources, is quite stark. They argue that in a tech war, ultimately, there are no winners.
Interesting. Why?
Their view seems to be that extreme fragmentation, decoupling, and conflict hinder overall progress and economic value creation for everyone in the long run. They describe their own role more as integrators, bringing together companies, capital, people, ideas, essentially trying to get the machine working again. It's a pragmatic stance suggesting that even amidst fierce competition and tension, some level of integration and collaboration is necessary just to keep the complex global tech ecosystem functioning and delivering value. The machine needs all its parts to work, even if they come from rivals.
That's a pragmatic take. And how do these geopolitical dynamics and the fundamental differences between political systems influence the actual speed at which countries can implement AI strategies and regulations?
It creates a significant difference in pace. The sources note that in, quote, autocratically managed countries, there's generally less debate required to push through major tech initiatives or regulations. Decisions can be made and implemented much more rapidly, as we perhaps saw with Dubai's quick adoption rates.
Right, top-down implementation.
Exactly. Conversely, in Europe and other democracies, the democratic freedom to debate policy, while absolutely crucial for legitimacy, transparency, and building robust frameworks, can also be a disadvantage in terms of competition when compared to the speed of deployment in places like China. It's a fundamental trade-off. The thoroughness and public buy-in that comes with democratic debate versus the sheer speed achievable through more centralized decision-making. It shapes the rhythm of the race.
The crucial trade-off indeed. Okay, we've explored the UK Act, we've looked at the global scene. Now let's really dive into the fundamental challenges, the deep ethical considerations that everyone everywhere is grappling with when it comes to AI governance. And maybe the biggest one is trust, which brings us right to the black box problem.
Yes. The black box problem is absolutely central to the trust issue in AI, especially with the really complex models like large language models, LLM.
Why is it such a problem?
Because there's often an inherent lack of transparency. These models achieve their impressive capabilities by processing just enormous amounts of structured and unstructured data in ways that involve billions, even trillions of parameters. The result is that their internal reasoning, how they actually arrive at an output, is often difficult, if not impossible, to explain. in terms a human can readily understand.
So you get an answer, but you don't know how it got there.
Exactly. It creates this dynamic of take my word for it, which just fundamentally clashes with the need for accountability and explainability, especially in high-stakes areas like finance, healthcare, or justice, where decisions need to be justifiable and auditable.
Can't human oversight fix that? Having a person check the AI's output?
Human oversight is important, yes, but it has its limits here. It's often good at catching the really obvious errors, the extreme cases like blatant hallucinations where the AI just makes something completely nonsensical up. But humans often struggle to detect the vast majority of plausible but false claims. The outputs that sound reasonable look right, but are subtly incorrect or based on flawed reasoning hidden within that black box. We're just not equipped to validate the internal process of such complex systems easily.
That sounds particularly dangerous in the financial sector, where decisions about loans, insurance, investments have such huge consequences. How does this black box issue play out there?
The AI in Finance report highlights this really well. This lack of transparency in things like AI-driven credit assessments, insurance pricing, or investment products can seriously undermine confidence. Well, imagine being denied a loan or quoted an extremely high insurance premium by an AI system, and the bank or insurer literally cannot explain the specific factors or logic that led to that decision. It makes it incredibly difficult, almost impossible, for customers, investors, or even regulators to detect potential errors, biases, or systemic risks lurking within the model. If you can't understand why a decision was made, how can you possibly trust it, appeal it, or regulate it effectively? It's a direct threat to fairness and market integrity.
And beyond just the opacity, there's the closely related and perhaps even more insidious problem of algorithmic bias. We hear a lot about this. Can you give us a concrete example of how this causes real-world harm?
This is where the consequences become truly devastating, moving way beyond technical glitches into profound human impact. Algorithmic bias often stems from the data used to train AI. If the data reflects historical societal biases, unrepresentative datasets, the AI will learn and often amplify those biases. Combine that with the lack of transparency we just discussed, and you have a recipe for discriminatory outcomes.
Is there a specific case that illustrates this starkly?
Yes, the sources highlight the harrowing example of the Dutch tax authority. They used an AI-based risk scoring system to identify potential welfare fraud.
Okay.
But the system ended up falsely labeling tens of thousands of families, disproportionately affecting those with lower income or ethnic minorities, as fraudsters. The algorithm picked up on flawed or biased indicators like having dual nationality or simply being poor and flagged them unfairly.
And what were the consequences for those families?
They were catastrophic. Families faced demands for huge repayments, leading to crippling debts. Many lost their homes, their jobs. In some cases, parents lost child custody as they were deemed unfit due to the financial stress and the fraud accusation. There were even reports of suicide linked to the despair caused by the situation. Over 1,000 children were reportedly taken into foster care because of decisions driven by a biased, opaque algorithm.
That's absolutely chilling, a truly stark reminder of the human cost when AI goes wrong, particularly when bias isn't addressed.
It really is. It powerfully illustrates why robust oversight, transparency, and mechanisms for redress are not optional extras. They are fundamental requirements for deploying AI responsibly, especially in the public sector.
So given these profound risks, the black box, the potential for devastating bias, how can we actually mitigate them? What tools or practices can help build that necessary trust?
It really requires a multi-pronged approach. We definitely need robust regulations that mandate transparency and fairness, particularly for high-risk systems. We need better methods for algorithmic transparency, even if perfect explainability isn't always possible. Strong human oversight remains critical, not just checking outputs, but understanding system limitations. And crucially, we need clear avenues for redress, so people harmed by AI decisions have a way to appeal and seek justice.
Are there specific techniques being developed to probe these systems for weaknesses?
Yes. Practices like red teaming and adversarial testing are becoming increasingly important. This involves having dedicated teams, using adversarial methods to identify vulnerabilities, flaws, and potential risks in AI models before they're deployed widely.
Like ethical hacking for AI.
Exactly. It's about proactively stress testing the system, trying to make it fail, trying to uncover hidden biases or security holes. The Biden administration, for example, has mandated this kind of testing for certain high-risk generative AI models used by the U.S. government. It's about finding the problems before they find us.
We've touched on soft law versus hard law before. Thinking about these trust and accountability issues, where does that debate land? Can voluntary ethical guidelines from companies really be enough?
This whole discussion really strengthens the case for hard law, for binding, enforceable regulations, while soft law initiatives like corporate AI principles, Google's, Bosch's, IBM's, or industry collaborations like the Partnership on AI are valuable for raising awareness and promoting dialogue. They inherently have weaknesses.
Such as,
They are often quite vague, making them hard to apply in practice. They usually have limited practical guidance. Crucially, they're typically non-binding, meaning there are no real teeth, no enforcement mechanisms if a company fails to live up to its own principles. And there's always the risk of ethics washing companies making grand ethical statements for PR purposes without substantive changes in practice.
so guidelines are good, but laws are necessary.
When you're dealing with potential harms on the scale we saw in the Dutch example, or the systemic risks in finance, relying solely on voluntary measures seems insufficient. Binding regulation provides legal certainty, creates a level playing field, and offers a much stronger guarantee that the public interest will be protected.
Okay, moving from trust to the fuel itself. Data. You've called it the lifeblood of AI. What does that mean for how we need to think about data quality, data management, and just the sheer amount of data required?
It means exactly that. AI technologies are based on data, period. Their performance, their reliability, their fairness, it all hinges on the data they're trained and run on. You can have the most sophisticated algorithm in the world, but if you feed it garbage data, you'll get garbage results. So, realizing AI's full potential absolutely requires qualitatively high data in sufficient quantity.
Quality and quantity.
Both. But the quality aspect is arguably becoming even more critical as models get more complex. Issues like bias often stem directly from poor quality or unrepresentative data. Effective data management, curation, and governance are therefore foundational to building trustworthy AI.
We talked about LLMs hallucinating or having outdated knowledge. Is there a way to address that using better data management, perhaps linking models to live data sources, rather than just retraining them constantly, which is hugely expensive?
Yes, there is, and it's a technique gaining a lot of traction. Retrieval augmented generation, or RAG.
RAG, how does that work?
A RAG is seen as a really promising approach to tackle exactly those problems, hallucinations, and stale knowledge. It essentially combines the already trained inherent capabilities of LLMs with the rich, constantly updating content from internal and external databases.
So the LLM doesn't just rely on its training data, it can look things up.
Precisely. Before generating an answer, the RAG system retrieves relevant, up-to-date information from a specified knowledge base, like a company's internal documents, a specific technical manual, or even curated web sources. It then feeds this retrieved information to the LLM along with the user's query. This allows the LLM to generate correct answers grounded in specific current information rather than just relying on its potentially outdated or generalized training.
Where is this being used?
We're seeing it applied effectively in areas like generating accurate code generation, powering helpful customer service bots that access knowledge bases, creating up-to-date product documentation, and improving internal knowledge management systems within organizations. It makes LLMs much more reliable and useful for specific tasks without the massive cost and time of constant retraining.
RGE sounds like a really clever solution, almost a workaround for some inherent LLM limitations. Is it easy to set up, or are there hidden challenges?
It sounds elegant, but it's definitely not simple to implement effectively. There are significant technical hurdles.
Like what?
Ensuring the quality of document embeddings is crucial. That's how the system represents and understands the information in the knowledge base so it can retrieve relevant pieces. Optimizing the search of context-relevant documents efficiently is another challenge. And dynamically figuring out the right number of relevant documents, top K, to feed the LLM for different types of questions is tricky. Too few, and the answer might lack detail. Too many, and it might get confused or lose focus. It requires careful design, robust data preparation, and ongoing tuning. It's not just plug and play.
That leads us to another, perhaps even more fundamental data challenge that recent research has highlighted, this alarming concept of model collapse. What on earth is that, and why should we be worried?
Model collapse is a deeply concerning phenomenon, potentially a major long-term threat to the progress of AI itself. A paper from July 2024 brought this into sharp focus. It found that AI models collapse when trained on recursively generated data.
Trained on data generated by other AI models.
Exactly. As more and more content online is generated by AI, text, images, code, there's a growing risk that future AI models will be trained predominantly on this synthetic data rather than original human-created data.
And what happens then?
The research suggests that the indiscriminate use of model-generated content in training causes irreversible defects in the resulting models. Essentially, the models start learning from the flaws, biases, and statistical artifacts present in the previous generation of AI-generated data. They forget the richness and diversity of the original human data distribution.
So the quality degrades over generations.
Yes, significantly. It leads to degraded outputs, reduced creativity, and potentially models that produce unsatisfactory, if not detrimental, decisions for the users. It's like making photocopies of photocopies. Eventually, the image becomes blurry and distorted. It's a potential self-destructive feedback loop for AI, where the models effectively poison their own future training data, potentially leading to a plateau or even a decline in capability over time.
That's a genuinely alarming prospect for a field built on continuous learning and improvement. How does this threat, along with the geopolitical issues we discussed, relate back to data sovereignty and security? Does it make controlling your own data even more critical?
Absolutely. The risk of model collapse underscores the critical importance of maintaining access to high-quality, diverse human-generated data. And concerns about data security, intellectual property leakage, and maintaining control over sensitive information are driving a strong push towards greater data sovereignty.
Are we seeing solutions emerge for this?
Yes, particularly for sensitive sectors. The sources mention solutions like POAMT and Piosphere, which are specifically designed for authorities and organizations in Germany that need high security. They promise things like no data outflow, full data sovereignty, and ensuring compliance with strict regulations like DSGVO, the German term for GDPR.
So secure, localized infrastructure.
Right. There's a clear demand for systems where organizations can train and run AI models on their own sensitive data without it leaving their control, protecting it from both external threats and potential contamination from unreliable public data sources. However, it's worth remembering that investor perspective again. Implementing robust data protection and sovereignty can be seen as financially tiring if it doesn't directly drive revenue. So there's that constant tension between ideal security and economic pragmatism.
That tension perfectly encapsulates the next big challenge: navigating the trade-off between encouraging innovation and mitigating all these risks we've discussed. It feels like policymakers are walking a very fine line.
It is arguably the central tightrope walk in AI governance. The core policy dilemma is how to best promote AI innovation while mitigating potential risks. Lean too heavily on regulation, especially disproportionate regulatory provisions, and you risk overburdening startups and smaller players, potentially stifling the very innovation you want to encourage and letting larger incumbents dominate.
But lean too far the other way.
Lean too far towards laissez-faire, and insufficient governance leaves individuals and society vulnerable to serious risks. The biases, the privacy violations, the safety failures, maybe even the existential risks some people worry about down the line. Finding that Goldilocks zone of regulation, not too hard, not too soft, is incredibly difficult, especially when the technology itself is a moving target.
There's a common narrative that regulation inherently stifles innovation, that it's just red tape holding back progress. But does that always hold true, especially for a technology as powerful and potentially disruptive as AI? Could regulation actually help innovation in some ways?
That's a really important counter-argument, and the World Bank report makes it quite strongly. It challenges the simplistic view that regulation is always bad for innovation. It argues that actually regulation is critical for creating a level competitive playing field for new market entrants. Well, clear rules can prevent dominant players from using unethical or unsafe practices to gain an edge. Regulation also creates legal certainty for established AI developers and deployers. Knowing the rules of the road allows companies to plan and invest with confidence. Uncertainty, on the other hand, can chill investment and innovation. Furthermore, building public trust through responsible regulation can actually increase the acceptance and adoption of AI technologies, creating a bigger market in the long run. So smart, well-designed regulation can be an enabler, not just a blocker.
That's a crucial perspective.
Right.
Now, one risk we haven't focused on as much, but which is getting increasing attention, is the environmental footprint of AI. Is that factoring into this balancing act?
It absolutely should be, and it's a significant and growing concern. The enormous energy consumption necessary to train and run AI models is staggering. Training a large foundational model can consume as much energy as hundreds of homes use in a year. And as AI use explodes, Data centers today consume more energy than ever before, putting a huge strain on electricity grids and contributing significantly to carbon emissions. It's a major sustainability challenge.
Is the tech sector working on solutions?
Yes, thankfully. Innovation is happening here too. The sources mention QANT, a German photonics company, as an example. They're working on using light photonics instead of electricity for processing AI workloads, aiming to reduce energy consumption for AI workloads by 30 times.
Processing with light, that sounds futuristic.
It does, but it highlights that there are technological pathways towards making AI much more energy efficient and environmentally sustainable. Addressing this environmental cost has to be part of responsible AI development and governance.
Absolutely. Finally, let's consider the human element again. With AI becoming capable of tasks previously thought uniquely human, like complex reasoning or creativity, how is the role of human experts, like engineers, changing? Is there an essential fear here?
There definitely is that underlying current, what one source calls the essential fear or angst, that deep-seated anxiety about machines surpassing human capabilities. We saw flashes of it with Deep Blue beating Kasparov at chess, or AlphaGo defeating the world's best Go player, Lee Sedol.
Moments where the machine seemed superhuman.
Exactly. But the narrative shouldn't just be about replacement. The role of human experts, like engineers, is evolving profoundly. It's shifting away from solely implementing, assembling, and composing new technologies.
Towards what?
Towards higher-level tasks like selecting and curating the results of AI's work, critically evaluating its outputs, and crucially, guiding the AI, setting its goals, defining its constraints, ensuring its alignment with human values. The sources introduce this idea of creative engineering.
Creative AI engineering.
Yeah, it's suggesting a future that's more about a partnership with these new artificial intelligences. This new role demands different skills, more creative, analytical, and interdisciplinary competencies. It's less about writing every line of code and more about architecting, orchestrating, and ethically guiding these incredibly powerful AI tools. It's a transformation, not necessarily an obsolescence, of human expertise.
That's a more optimistic framing. So looking further ahead now, casting our eyes towards, say, 2040 and beyond, how might AI fundamentally reshape our daily lives, according to the Vision 2040 mentioned in the sources?
The Vision 2040 suggests a future where generative AI isn't just a tool we occasionally use, but something that fundamentally transforms our daily routines, weaving itself into the fabric of both work and leisure.
How so? Will we all just be lounging around while AI does everything?
Maybe not quite. The vision suggests that while the basics like needing 12 hours for personal care, sleep, and food intake might stay roughly the same, we're still biological creatures after all, the remaining hours of our day will be heavily modified by AI interaction. It paints a picture of pervasive assistance and augmentation.
How might our work lives change specifically? Will it just be about efficiency or something more?
Efficiency is definitely a big part of it. The prediction is that generative AI applications will make many professional activities more efficient. Think about AI handling the information overload from emails, summarizing long reports, automating routine tasks, maybe even making meetings more productive or less frequent. The aim is significantly increasing productivity.
Freeing up the human time for other things.
That's the idea. The concept of personal artificial intelligences is floated right way. Imagine having your own AI assistant deeply integrated into your workflow. This could be a transformative force, not just boosting productivity, but also potentially fostering creativity by taking care of the drudgery, and even improving personal well-being by reducing workplace stress.
That vision of personal AIs leads to deeper questions, doesn't it? About the blurring lines between humans and machines. Where could that lead?
It certainly touches on some quite profound, almost philosophical territory. The sources mention futurists like Ray Kurzweil and his book, The Next Stage of Evolution. He predicts that the boundaries between human and machine increasingly blur, potentially leading to human-machine hybrids.
Hybrids, like cyborgs.
Essentially, yes. Technologies that augment our biological capabilities directly. Kurzweil even speculates about the potential to elevate our consciousness to a higher level through this integration. We see early glimpses of this potential perhaps in things like Elon Musk's Neuralink project.
Right, the brain-computer interface.
Exactly. The sources mention the case of a paralyzed person gaining new astonishing abilities, like controlling devices with their thoughts via a Neuralink implant. It's incredible potential.
But are there warnings attached to this vision?
Oh yes. Kurzweil himself, while optimistic, also includes clear warnings about potential dangers. One major concern he flags is the risk of total surveillance if our minds and bodies become increasingly connected to external networks. So it's a vision with both immense promise and significant peril, raising fundamental questions about autonomy, privacy, and what it means to be human.
It really does. And that brings us, as we wrap up this deep dive, back to a final thought-provoking question raised in the material. It kind of encapsulates the mystery still surrounding AI, despite all our progress. What is it?
It's that beautifully simple yet incredibly profound philosophical question. What do machines dream of? It pushes us beyond the code, beyond the regulations, beyond the utility. It forces us to contemplate the nature of consciousness, creativity, inner experience, things we associate with being human, and whether these could ever emerge in artificial systems. It's a reminder that as we build ever more intelligent machines, we're also holding up a mirror to ourselves, prompting us to think more deeply about what truly defines intelligence, awareness, and life itself.
A perfect, slightly unsettling question to end on. We have covered a huge amount of ground today in this deep dive, really digging into the intricate landscape of AI governance. We started by meticulously unpacking the UK's Data Access and Use Act 2025.
Really comprehensive.
Yeah, looking at its ambition to create a more structured data economy, its provisions for digital identity, and that significant overhaul of its data protection authority into the new Information Commission.
And we didn't just stay in the UK. We placed it within that much wider global mosaic, comparing it with the EU's pioneering risk-based AI Act, Dubai's incredibly ambitious state-driven economic integration strategy, India's focus on building core AI infrastructure and compute power,
Right.
and China's clear drive for strategic autonomy and technological self-reliance, all playing out against that backdrop of intense geopolitical competition. It really highlights the diversity of approaches worldwide.
And we also spent time grappling with those fundamental challenges that cut across all borders. The absolute necessity of building trust by tackling the black box problem and ensuring transparency and accountability. Confronting the dangers of algorithmic bias, as shown by that terrible Dutch example.
Yeah.
Manage the quality, security, and sheer volume of data needed to fuel AI, especially with that looming threat of model collapse if we're not careful about training data. And of course, that constant delicate balancing act for policymakers, how to foster innovation while mitigating the very real risks, including AI's growing environmental footprint.
So looking forward, with AI developing so rapidly, crossing borders effortlessly, and with such different national philosophies on how to govern it, a huge question hangs in the air, doesn't it? How can we possibly achieve effective international coordination?
Yeah, can these different approaches ever be bridged?
Will the future demand a completely new level of global collaboration? One that maybe prioritizes shared human values, fundamental rights, protecting against catastrophic risks, perhaps even above narrow national interests or purely commercial advantage?
That really is the multi-trillion-dollar question for the future, isn't it? And for you, our listener, perhaps something to consider is this. As AI becomes ever more deeply woven into the fabric of our lives, affecting everything from the news you see to your job prospects to maybe even your healthcare, what role can you play? What role can we play collectively in shaping how this technology is governed? Are we just users or data subjects?
Or can we be active participants in demanding accountability, fairness, and ensuring the benefits are shared equitably?
Exactly. How do we collectively ensure that society remains firmly in the driving seat as we navigate this profound technological transformation, this ongoing deep dive into our digital future? Lots to think about.
Definitely.
We'll leave it there for today. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.
Light spectrum, let's compute to chill the